Hi, and welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Rebecca Armstrong Langle, League Vice President and your host this evening. Each program we talk about important policy issues. We hope you'll talk about those same issues and then at election time be ready and willing to go vote. Tonight I'm excited to introduce Robert McEwen from the Courts Matter Coalition of Nebraska and Nebraska Appleseed as our guest. Robert, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Rebecca. So I am an attorney with Nebraska Appleseed. I've been the legal director at Nebraska Appleseed for 2 years now. And Nebraska Appleseed is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, public interest legal advocacy organization. As part of my work, I've also been co-chair of the Courts Matter Coalition with Carol Block. And the Courts Matter Coalition is a group of interested community partners and individuals that care about our federal court system.
Great. So Robert, what is Courts Matter?
Well, Courts Matter is a group of folks that deeply believes that our court system matters to issues that we work on as a community and issues that affect everyday Nebraskans. And so we work towards educating the public about how the court system operates and mostly focus on how they can make their voices heard when there are federal judicial nominations.
Great. So how did you get involved in this movement?
So Nebraska Appleseed had been a participant on the Courts Matter Coalition for longer than I have been legal director. And when I assumed the position of legal director, I did not know what was in store for me, but the participation was handed over to me by Rebecca Gonzalez, who was part of the coalition before I was. And I didn't know what to expect, but the groups and people that participate with our coalition were very welcoming and excited to welcome me into the group. So that is, it became part of my job duties with Appleseed, and I've continued on working with this issue and with the coalition because I do strongly believe, as both an advocate and a customer of the federal court system as an attorney, that courts really do matter in our society.
So you talked a little bit about the coalition. What other groups are involved in it?
So there's a variety of groups that participate in the coalition. So there are other nonprofits that participate. There are faith groups. There are individual community leaders. So it really is a broad coalition of individuals that care about the court system in one way or the other. So we have a couple of entities that work on healthcare-related issues, and again, healthcare is one of the more important issues that Appleseed works on, and access to healthcare. And so it's a direct example of how healthcare can be affected by federal court decisions pretty easily. There have been some major ones in the last couple of years. So it's a great collaborative of nonprofits and community leaders, essentially.
So you talked a little bit about healthcare. What are some other goals of the coalition?
So the goals of the coalition really are focused on educating the public about how the court system operates. Most folks don't realize that federal court appointees do sit in the federal court for life, and so they are appointed by the sitting United States president. And so it really is intermeshed with our political process, but folks generally don't know that. Their voices do matter when the president is appointing federal judicial nominees. And so we work on educating the public about how courts intersect with their lives and encourage folks that do care about those issues to make their voice heard in the process.
Great. So what levels of the court system is the coalition involved with?
It would be mostly focused on the federal system, and so when there are appointees, for instance, we've had a couple in Nebraska in the last couple of years that are good examples. We've had Brian Buscher's a recent nominee for the federal district court in Nebraska. And then on the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals level, there's also been recent appointees, the Honorable Steve Grass, who was appointed by President Trump and was successfully confirmed as also somebody that we didn't work with Judge Grass, but we worked during the nomination to make sure that people knew how to reach their delegates and make their voices heard.
So you said Nebraska's in the 8th Circuit. What does that mean? How many circuits are there in the country, and how does that operate?
So yes, so Nebraska sits within the 8th Circuit with Iowa, South Dakota, Arkansas, and and I believe, yep, that should be it. And Minnesota. Oh, we can't forget the Gophers. Minnesota is also in the 8th Circuit. And so each of the federal circuits of appeals sit underneath the U.S. Supreme Court, and those are the courts that hear cases that go up to the United States Supreme Court. And below that, you have the federal district court level, and those are the trial courts. So the courts of appeals will hear issues that arise from those trial courts, and if enough circuits have a different opinion, generally the U.S. Supreme Court will take a case from one of the appellate courts. So that our 8th Circuit is right underneath the United States Supreme Court and is the law of the land collectively in all of our states.
So how many circuits are there in the U.S.?
There are 11 circuits in the United States.
Great. And they all can operate autonomously?
Great question. So they do operate autonomously, and oftentimes you will have circuits that have different opinions than one another. So the 8th Circuit may view a healthcare issue one way, and the 9th Circuit, which comprises California and a lot of the Pacific Coast states, will view an issue differently. And so you'll have contradictory rulings, and that's usually when the United States Supreme Court will step in to settle an issue.
Makes sense. So just to remind everyone, I'm talking with Robert McEwen tonight from the Courts Matter Coalition of Nebraska here on the League of Women Voters Go Vote Omaha show. Robert, can you talk about how decisions made in federal courts impact Nebraska families?
Sure. So federal courts handle a variety of issues. At the trial court level, where these cases will start out, a lot of those judges hear criminal cases, civil cases, and issues related to healthcare, housing, pretty much any instance or interaction you can imagine with human beings. There is a lawsuit in there somewhere. So pretty much every aspect of our daily lives can be ruled on in the federal court system. And so especially in these times, right now there's issues with the federal government shutdown, so there's lack of funding being directed towards the federal court system. Makes those issues even more poignant when the court system gets backed up and is federally funded. Criminal prosecutions in some places are struggling to go forward. So it really does impact everybody's safety and access to health care and environmental regulation. Pretty much any issue you can think of can find its way into the federal court system.
Wow. So from your perspective as an attorney, what does a good judge look like?
They should agree with me. No, to be honest, Nebraska is really fortunate. We have, in my opinion, the best federal bench in the country. Our judges, I think, display a lot of the tendencies that we should look for in qualified judges. To be impartial, to be willing to listen, and to be willing to put aside any preconceived agendas or ideas that they may have to honestly rule on what they believe is the law. And so I do think those would be the qualities that I look for in a judge, is not ruling in my favor every time, but at least being willing to listen to an argument.
So how are judges nominated to the court? How does that get started?
Yeah, so the process starts when a vacancy is created, and as I mentioned earlier, federal court nominees sit for life, and so vacancies are either created by a death or a retirement, and so a good example of that would be Justice Scalia from the U.S. Supreme Court passed away several years ago, and it created a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court. So when there is a vacancy, it is the president's job to put forth a nominee to replace that person. So that is very high profile when it happens at the United States Supreme Court level, but it's the same process for every federal vacancy that there is. And so the president and the administration will generally have a team of folks that will go forth and identify individuals that they determine are qualified to serve on the federal bench. then the process will also generally, and more so in the past than currently, the president will ask the home state senators from the state where the vacancy is what their opinion on the nominee is, and if the two folks approve, the two federal senators approve of the nominee, they would return something called a blue slip, showing that they approve of that candidate. And then the process would move on to the Judiciary Committee, where they will have the hearing with the individual, and they'll ask them questions about their philosophy, their views on life, their record. And then the Judiciary Committee will either vote to move that candidate on to the full Senate, or they will vote to return the nomination. And then the full Senate will vote on a candidate. And if that person gets a majority of the votes from the full U.S. Senate, they are confirmed, and they will be a federal court judge for as long as they please, or they pass away.
How often is it that a federal nominee for a judgeship is not confirmed?
That's a great question. So it does happen. There have been some pretty high-profile incidents where that has happened in the last 20 or 30 years. But recently, with the administration being politically aligned with how the Senate operates, there have not been as many folks that have had their nominations returned. There have been a couple examples in the last year or two where that's happened, but it's not very common where somebody will be rejected. Generally, the administration does their due diligence up front and knows who they may be able to get through the process and who may be a higher risk candidate.
Sure. So you kind of talked already about how our judge is nominated. What happens after the nomination to the confirmation stage?
There are a lot of things that will happen, and so folks will, during and prior to the judiciary hearing, a variety of different groups will weigh in with their home state senators or with the Judiciary Committee about their feelings about the nominee. And the American Bar Association will go and investigate the nomination, they will interview, and then they will give their recommendations as to whether they believe that individual is qualified or not qualified for the position. They'll conduct anonymous interviews with attorneys that have practiced with or against or in front of that judge if they have prior judicial experience. And it is sort of like a thorough FBI background check. So they, again, another layer of due diligence to make sure that this person who will be deciding important issues for the next 20 or 30 years should be on the bench.
So you talked about death and retirement being the reasons. Is there really no other reason that a judge could get removed?
It is very difficult. So judges can be impeached if they have conduct that is unbecoming towards their office, but it is a similar process to having a United States president impeached. So it is possible. It does not happen very much at all.
So it would go through the Senate as well?
Yes, it would.
Interesting. How do judges get to higher positions on the court?
So that's a great question. Many of the judges that serve on the appellate courts will have previous experience as a trial court judge at the district court level. And so it's a different position with different requirements, but judges that are able to display a good track record as a district court level judge are high quality and generally confirmable picks to serve on the appellate court. Essentially, if the Senate has voted them through once, they're more likely to be voted through at a higher level. And similarly, from the courts of appeals to the United States Supreme Court, it's even more so that the picks that are chosen for U.S. Supreme Court justices generally have served as an appellate court judge within one of the circuits. And so that's pretty consistent with the last several nominations. They've, for instance, Justice Gorsuch served on the 10th Circuit prior to his nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Justice Kavanaugh served on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Great,
yes. So what are potential roadblocks to a judge's confirmation?
So there are several along the way. Generally, it has been a roadblock in the past for home state senators disagreeing with the nomination made by the president and refusing to return their blue slips. That has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. So the blue slip tradition or process, which had existed for quite a while, is not being followed to the same level of stringency that it has been in the past. And so nominations have gone forward in the past 2 years over the objection of home state senators. So that used to be more of a roadblock to a nomination than it currently is in practice. The next area where there could be a roadblock to a nomination is if the Judiciary Committee does not think a candidate is qualified or is would be a good choice to move on to the full Senate. So the Judiciary Committee can vote to scuttle a nomination. And then the final roadblock would be the vote of the full U.S. Senate. And so in Nebraska, Senator Sass sits on the Judiciary Committee and has been a part of all of the judicial nominations put forth by the current administration. And so Nebraska is really lucky in that way, where we have a senator on that committee, and if you do care about those issues, he has a direct access to ask that individual questions and really dig into their qualifications.
Sure. So just to remind everyone, I am talking tonight with Robert McEwen from the Nebraska Courts Matter Coalition, as well as from Nebraska Appleseed. Thank you again for joining us, Robert. How can an average citizen get involved in this confirmation process? It seems big.
It is. It can seem really big and really intimidating. Legal stuff is generally hard, but it doesn't really have to be. There's a lot of really good information put out into the universe by organizations like, or coalitions like Courts Matter, about issues that you may care about. So you don't have to go read all 150 of a judge's or a potential judge's published opinions on issues to get a sense of how they may rule on issues as a sitting judge. So organizations that, like Courts Matter, that try to provide the public with information about what a candidate's views are or nominee's views are and what issues they have ruled on in the past, that information is out there. So getting educated would be the first part about how you might feel about a nominee and issues that you would care about. And then it is actually not as difficult as many would assume to just contact your friendly home state senator. Senator Sass and Senator Fisher have folks that work in their office on these issues every day, and they are definitely willing to take phone calls from community members, and that is the easiest way to voice your opinion about the process and who's been nominated is contacting Senator Fisher or Senator Sass.
Great. So what are the implications of vacant judgeship seats in the federal court system?
That's a great question. And there are many implications. There have been, over the last couple of years, and especially prior to the current administration, there were a vast amount of vacancies in the system. The current administration has appointed more judges in their first 2 years than most presidents have throughout their entire 4-year tenure.
Wow.
So we still have a lot of vacancies in our system, but they are quickly being filled by judges who will serve on the bench for the next 30 or 40 years. But vacancies generally will create backlog within the system. So Nebraska, for instance, at the trial court level, we have 3 current active judges that we are docketed for, and when there are only 2, there are judges that will need to fill in the gaps of a missing judge or a vacant judge. And so if your docket or case size gets very large, that becomes more difficult to manage for the 2 active judges. They'll have to call folks out of retirement or utilize judges that are senior status on more cases to sort of make up the difference.
Sure. As an individual, what does that mean if a docket's full? To me, what does that mean?
Well, it means your case will move through the court system more slowly than it already does. And generally, justice, the wheels of justice are a slow-moving, slow-grinding process. So court cases, most folks don't realize, a federal court case takes years and years to resolve. It is oftentimes one of the more slowly moving processes that we have in the United States government. And so when you have a civil case in the federal court system, for example, judges need to prioritize a lot of criminal cases because there's a constitutional right to a speedy trial. If you have a civil issue, it means that you will have slower access to justice than you might otherwise have.
Sure. All right. So why should we care as individuals and then as a community about federal court nominees?
I do think we as a community should really care about who is representing us on the federal courts. They will be deciding the issues about who can access and how you can access health care, whether the environment is protected or unprotected, whether regulations are overreaching and unconstitutional. So those folks will be on that court or within the court system for the remainder of their lives. And so we as a community, if we wish to express our values to our delegates, we should communicate those values in a way that makes sense during that nomination process, because those judges, they make decisions that are very important to everybody's life.
Can you tell me about a win that the Courts Matter Coalition has had, a big success?
Yeah, so during the last couple of nomination processes in Nebraska, and there's been a couple of high-profile ones in Nebraska and at the U.S. Supreme Court, we've really been able to dig down and engage community members in new ways. And so we've done different community outreach events. We did a training at UNL for college students about the court system. And so we've tried to engage different types of folks about the court system earlier on and more frequently than we have in the last couple of years. And so we do think that's resulted in increased calls and increased engagement with our federal delegation when there has been a nomination. And again, the Courts Matter Coalition, we've never taken a position on any nominees, and Nebraska Appleseed doesn't either. So we are just encouraging folks, however they may feel about a nominee, to reach out to the senators and either let them know we support this guy or gal, or we don't support this guy or gal, and here are the reasons why.
Yeah. So what action steps can community members, either as a group or as individuals, take to help the court system, to help become more involved?
So if anybody is interested in participating on the Courts Matter group, we meet quarterly. It is very low pressure. We meet at Temple Israel in Omaha once a month. And so we are an open group. If you'd like to come and attend, we would love to have anybody that is interested. And if anybody wants to, you can go to anyappleseed.org and you can find my email address, or you can give me a call. I'm more than willing to sign anybody up that wants to participate. But another way that community members can take action steps, even if they are not able to participate on the coalition, would just be to, when there is a nomination, it generally is going to be reported in the media, just to pay a little extra attention when that comes up, and take note of who's being nominated and why they're being nominated and what they think of that person, because there is a chance that that judge could be ruling on a case that is important to you someday.
Sure. Are there any nominations currently open in Nebraska in the 8th District or anywhere that Nebraska citizens should know about?
Yes, so the nomination of Brian Busher, who is an attorney here in Omaha, is moving forward right now, and I believe he's had his Senate Judiciary hearing, and he is awaiting full confirmation from the U.S. Senate, but there is, again, a little bit of a delay going on within the federal government right now, and there are a list of nominees that have not been yet approved. So the U.S. Senate has not voted on his confirmation yet. There is great information out in the local media about Mr. Busher and how he has operated as an attorney and some of the issues that he has spoken publicly on. So if you're interested, that information is definitely publicly available. If you'd like to have more information, I'd be willing to again, send you anything that I have, mostly just media stories about Mr. Busher. And but it looks like his nomination likely will be confirmed, and he will be replacing one of the longer term and actually our leader within the Nebraska District Court system, one of the longer term judges, Judge Lori Smithcamp.
Okay.
So that looks like it will be proceeding on as soon as the Senate is voting on things again.
So that's the 8th Circuit Court For
8th Circuit
Yeah,
District Court.
District Court,
So
yeah.
that'll be for the District of Nebraska.
And Judge Smithcamp is retiring.
She is. She's
Yeah.
going to go senior status. And if you go senior status, you will still hear cases, but you will not have a full docket or caseload. But she will be in semi-retirement.
So what does that mean? You can still rule on cases without being one of the 3 judges on the circuit?
That's right. And it's the best of all worlds. If you are a judge that gets to that point in their career where they can take senior status, some of our judges that have been senior status will tour the country and fill in on various courts that have a vacancy. So they'll get to see other parts of the country and rule on issues that they might not otherwise get to rule on here in Nebraska. And then they don't have to hear as many cases. So it is a reward for being a public servant for so long.
Sounds like it's good too to help lower caseloads.
It is, yes. It's a pretty effective tool. The judges that I've spoken with that have taken senior status do really enjoy their ability to see the country, experience new things, and help out where there's been a gap. Cool.
Is there anything else that you think the community needs to know about Courts Matter and your work?
I don't think so. The Courts Matter work it's one of the more fulfilling pieces of work that I get to do at Nebraska Appleseed, and it really is a group of welcoming and inclusive folks that care about the court system. As a coalition, as I mentioned, we don't take positions on individual nominees, but we assist anybody that participates with the coalition to take a position on nominees. So we have people that come that will take a position on nominees. And if that is something you're interested in doing, we can help facilitate that as a coalition.
Great.
So we don't care what you think. We care that you think.
Great. Same with us.
Good.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today. I really appreciate it and your work on this issue. Again, Robert said this, but if you want more information on Courts Matter, you can go to nyappleseed.org and get in contact with Robert. So thanks again, and for the League of Women Voters, I'm Rebecca, reminding you to inform yourself on the issues and go vote Omaha.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. We did it.
All right.